I'm so pleased to be here today with Erica Goldman, Deputy Director for the Global Council for Science and the Environment. I'm really excited about the upcoming annual conference theme we've decided to hold. The theme itself is focused on thresholds, positive thresholds in the context of climate change. Erica, can you talk a little bit about the theme itself and this concept of climate positive thresholds?
Sure. Thanks so much, Michelle. I think we've all become increasingly familiar with the idea of thresholds in a climate context, but most often when we hear about hear about thresholds, it's in this gloom and doom narrative. We hear about the irrevocable harm and the cliff of points of no recovery with certain changes in greenhouse gas emissions. What we're talking about here and what we're so excited about in terms of this conference theme is that the same framing, the same concept of thresholds can apply to this idea of jump-starting recovery, so that the same thresholds, the same cliffs that we're going off that change systems into undesirable stable states, we can work backwards and basically cause the global climate system and our food systems and our water systems to recover. The scientists who studied this early on, like Steve Carpenter and Lance Gunderson, Martin Shepard, they looked at ecological systems. So lakes, where all of a sudden, they'd be clear, 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 and boom, they would turn cloudy and eutrophic, full of algae. And I've always been fascinated by this idea that systems can absorb a lot of change, but then all of a sudden they can't anymore. And then, poof, something happens and everything goes into a different state. The science is leading us in a direction where we can really start to see how, if we accelerate change in one sector, for example, use of electric vehicles, we can create market forces and demand to further accelerate change in that direction.
With EVs, if EVs begin to hit the road in unprecedented numbers, the infrastructure systems to support electric vehicles will have to respond accordingly. And you start to think about this almost in a cascading way, right? If I understand what you're saying, we can start to see not just a threshold or a point tipped, but we actually see a cascading impact of positive thresholds. And that's one of the reasons that we talk about it in the plural. The possibilities when you start to think this way are extraordinary.
But I think this idea of multiple thresholds is really important because it directly informs policy strategies. So we may not be able to achieve, a particular threshold with electric vehicles at this point in time, but maybe there's another one that if we're working towards that one simultaneously, it will have a parallel effect in this other system. So I think the most important take home here is not the sort of the nitty gritty of, is it this threshold right now or that threshold, but being able to step back and take a system wide lens on
Yeah.
climate in a different way, where we recognize that the systems are hugely dynamic, but in ways that are predictable, and that if we push in one area, we can also be monitoring the changes in another area and work towards these thresholds, these upward scaling tipping points that can push our systems back into states that we want to see.
If I'm just a person listening to all of this, how can a positive climate threshold be relatable to me? What can I do to make that happen? What threshold can I touch?
It's hard to take this concept that we're articulating at the system scale and bring it all the way down to the level of the individual. But in order for this to resonate, that's ultimately what's going to be the most important. And I think it's really a communications opportunity. And I think it's this idea that you're part of a bigger change, and that the momentum of small change towards big change really happens. And so I think that the more that we can actually demonstrate the course towards those changes, provides reinforcement and incentives for people to actually be part of that change, recognizing what's possible out there in the future.